There are 5 levels to the JLPT, but not many learners really know what each level means. This video will show you what the JLPT actually is, what each level actually means, some sample questions taken from the official tests, and aim to answer the question of whether the JLPT is even right for you. Let's get started. First of all, JLPT stands for Japanese Language Proficiency Test. And if you just take a look at the name alone, you would assume that N5 being the lowest level, you would assume that this level is the lowest level of proficiency, while N1 is an extremely high level of proficiency. This is a common misconception and is not true. 日本語能力試験に関しては大きな誤解が3つあります。Number 1, N5 is basic proficiency while N1 is peak achievement. Number 2, you have to start from the N5 then work your way up. And number 3, you should structure your learning around the JLPT. Let's start by debunking point number 1. The JLPT is not an accurate measure for your actual proficiency. There are 2 reasons for this. Number 1, the JLPT does not check for your output abilities. There is no speaking section or writing section. つまり日本語を喋れなくても書けなくても N1 に合格することは無理ではないです。Imagine this situation. You're about to meet some Japanese people for the first time and you want to introduce them to your friend who has the N1. You build them up to be this guy who's achieved the highest level of proficiency and he comes in and he can't speak. で、その人は果たして流暢と言えるのでしょうか？僕はそう思いません。The second reason is this. The test is really easy, even at the N1 level. Now, easy and hard is very subjective, obviously, and I'm not saying this to be like, well, I cleared it, it's so easy. I'm not saying that. What I'm comparing it to is other language tests. See, if a Japanese native person were to take the N1, probably around 99 to 100% of them would easily pass the test. Getting 100% on the test, that's a different matter, but passing it probably with a score around 90%-ish is very likely. Conversely, the test for Japanese natives called the Kanken, that goes from, I don't know what the lowest level is, to the highest level being level 1. Most Japanese natives have only a level 2. In fact, the pass rate for the level 1 for native Japanese speakers is around 10 to 20%. And if we compare these tests to other tests like, for example, English, we have IELTS. When a native speaker does take the IELTS, the average score is a 6.9 out of 9. I, in fact, tried a few questions from the test just for fun, and I scored a 7.5, not a 9. So when we compare to these 2 tests where native speakers of the respective language struggle to get the highest score, and we compare it to the N1 where native speakers can clear this with almost a perfect score, I think it breaks the illusion that people who can get the N1 are these super elite learners. あと実際の話なんですけど、僕には日本に移住した友達が何人かいます。その人たちはもう何年も日本に住んでいて、仕事でもプライベートでもほぼ毎日日本語を使っているので、資格上は N2 でも N1 の僕より実力は相当上だと思います。あとさ、日本に行ったらさ、コンビニとか行くじゃん。そこのレジの人がもし外国人であれば、大体その人は N1 を持ってないです。おそらく N4 か N3 ぐらいだけです。なのに全然うまく喋れるし、仕事もできますね。Doesn't that throw the entire system into chaos if the N4 guy can speak better than the N1? I'm sure the N1 guy on paper knows more words, but knowing more words should not be the only measure of proficiency. Now, if the N1 is already such a low-level achievement, then what does that make the N5? Well, this is where we get to the next point. No, you do not need to start with the N5 to move upwards. You can start wherever you want. I personally have never taken the N5 to N2 officially. I've only taken the N1 officially, so I jumped straight to it. And no, the JLPT does not make for a good study guide. Remember, JLPT is just a test, not a curriculum. There are no official study books or study guides. The only official books that exist are these ones, which are only a collection of test questions, not study guides. Well then what about non-official study guides then? The thing with anything that is unofficial is that the JLPT organization themselves have not released an official vocab or grammar list, which means that any non-official resource that claims to teach you JLPT level stuff are either 1, making it up, which means that they will be inconsistent across different books and resources, or number 2, they are relying on this list made by a guy called Jonathan Waller. Jonathan Waller made this JLPT vocab list in 2010 based on all the tests up to that point. This list is also used on jisho.org as well as JMDict, which is used on stuff like Yomitan and Migaku. The problem with Jonathan Waller's list, however, is that when he made this list, the N system as we know it today did not exist. Which means that even if we were to use Waller's list, the levels are still arbitrary. In fact, here are some examples of some words that are quite common and quite easy. And these are ranked N1 on Jonathan Waller's list, while these words over here, which are more rare and difficult, are ranked N4. So, if the JLPT ranks words not based on difficulty and not based on frequency, what do they rank it by? I don't know, which is exactly why it does not make for a good learning resource, especially when we have better tools. Currently, what I believe to be the best way to learn new vocab is to use the free app called Anki, then go through any beginner deck, whether that's the Core 2K or Kaishi 1.5K, or the deck that I'm currently making at the moment. These decks are not randomly picked words, but are in fact the 2,000 most commonly used Japanese words. Learning these words will immediately give you practical usage for these words because they're the most common, which I think is a lot more valuable than what the JLPT word list offers. Now let's talk about each level specifically and what they mean, as well as my recommendations on whether you should take it or not. Starting with the N5, the lowest level. To cut straight to the chase, the JLPT N5 is useless. Remember that the name Proficiency Test does not accurately represent what this test actually is. The N5 is the greatest example of this because this is an incompetency test. I think that nobody should be taking this level of test because you do not need to waste money and time to get a certificate saying that you are incompetent. Now, why is the N5 so bad? In short, the questions on this test do not reflect real-life Japanese usage. You can clear this test and yet still not understand any part of real Japanese at all. The main reason for this is because they try to avoid using kanji where possible. But in real life, kanji is part of Japanese and it is something you will have to learn. Let's take a look at an example question. Observe question 21 over here. Notice that this sentence has no kanji at all. If this sentence were to appear in real Japanese, this is the way that it would be written. If I were to translate what this test sounds like into English, it would sound something like this. MYROOMISONTHESECOND blank OHOF Notice how I struggled to read that. In fact, when Japanese natives read sentences like these, where kanji is supposed to be used but it's not being used, it will actually take them more effort to try to decipher it. I'm actually going to go through each of the official JLPT books and go through every single question, including the N5 questions, but I will make them more practical to real life, as well as try to explain the underlying grammar structure behind each sentence. This course will be available on Patreon for anyone who subscribed to the Kumicho tier or above. Okay, next I'm actually going to jump to N3. You'll see why I skipped N4 once I get to it. N3 is actually great. I like it. The type of Japanese that you'll encounter at this level is quite basic, but also quite normal. It does, to an extent, reflect how Japanese people talk in real life, just granted with less slang. At this level, you should be able to comprehend some of what's happening in, say, an anime or a drama, and while you may not know every single word, you'll still understand the rough idea of about 70% of the things you'll see. Especially if it's not just the text, but if you have, say, visual cues, or if you've pre-watched a certain show with English subtitles beforehand, you can really begin to comprehend a lot of stuff even if you don't know that many words. Now, of course, I would still not call an N3 person proficient because there's no guarantee of whether they can speak or not. Let's take a look at an example question. Question 15 over here. この紙は濡れても破れにくいという何々があります。1、実力。2、特徴。3、専門。4、主張。Now, I've provided the English translations of the sentences over here, and as you can probably imagine, this is just normal language. There's nothing weird about it at all. These are not particularly tough words, nor is it a particularly tough or rare sentence. A native Japanese person would have no problem understanding and answering this question immediately. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't mean that the N3 is just the best thing in the world. The downside of taking the N3 is that it doesn't actually give you any benefits. 1, it doesn't count towards your visa, and 2, most jobs that need you to be able to speak Japanese aren't looking for N3, and even if they are, you're competing with someone who holds an N1. Not to mention, even if you do get a job interview, this thing here is not a statement on how good your spoken Japanese is. You will still need to have actual Japanese skills to back up this thing. And now let's skip over to the N1. Again, I've skipped over the N2 for now, but when I get to it, you'll see why. This thing is my baby. I really like the N1. It's very fun. I believe that when you get to this level, you will also find it very fun. What it isn't, though, is a voucher for godlike skills. This just means you have basic competency plus the knowledge of some maybe rarer vocab or rarer grammar points. And pause right there, don't think that the N1 is full of these rare grammar points that no one ever actually uses. It makes up a very small minority of what the N1 actually is. I think many people are surprised at how common N1 level words actually are, keeping in mind as well that what is N1 level? Who decided that? Realistically, the N1 is probably around high school level, so I would expect a native speaker of ages under 13, say, to maybe struggle with this, but anything above that, I reckon they pass more than fail. In other words, those who are able to pass the N1 have the reading and listening capabilities of about a 13-year-old native Japanese child. And if anything, probably slightly worse. A lot of words at this level are biased towards professional usage, and so someone who's really good at the listening section of an N1 may still struggle to listen to casual Japanese as spoken by random people on the street. There is no slang or up-to-date hip terms or anything like that. For reference, here's a sample of the listening section of the test.
課長、明日の会議の企画書、見ていただけたでしょうか？
わかりやすく出来上がってるね。
ありがとうございます。
And for comparison, here's an actual Japanese person speaking.
なんか毎日タバコも吸ってるし漫画読んでるからなんかそういえば体に悪いような悪かったようなまだ確定してないかなと僕の中では、はい、ネットのフェイクニュースかもしれないと思ってるので。
So as you can see, there's still quite a big difference. And again, this just highlights how bad it is to rely on the JLPT as your only study resource. This is the peak of the JLPT, and yet it gets nowhere close to reality. Let's open this up and see some example questions. Take a look at question 12. このテーブルは私が子供の頃から使っているので、何々があって捨てられない。1、心情。2、好感。3、熱意。4、愛着。Now, as you can see, this is not particularly like super high level language. The most important thing here is that this still sounds normal and people do write like this. None of these words are particularly rare or super formal. However, there is one note whereby it may not be completely clear which answer is correct, not because you don't understand the words, but because there are multiple correct looking answers. This happens in N1 quite a lot, because the initial question asks not for the correct answer, but 最も良いもの, the most fitting answer. And this is the way the question is phrased in all the levels, but in N1 and N2 in particular, it's not just about understanding what each word means, but how they're used and the nuance behind them. This is one of the reasons why natives may not get 100%. In this particular example, though, I don't think the English really explains how obvious the answer is in Japanese. If you know all these 4 words in Japanese, the answer is incredibly obvious. Now, what about N4? The thing about N4 is that it's a mixture of the stuff that's happening in N5 and N3. And now that I say it, it sounds pretty obvious, but let me explain. Essentially, because this thing does what the N5 does, where it replaces actual words with the spelling of the word, it completely undermines the usefulness of the N4. See, here's the thing you have to understand about Japanese words. A lot of words are commonly written using kanji. This is the normal way of writing it. My guess is that some people think, well, if it's written in kanji, some people may not understand this. So let's simplify it by writing it in kana. But if you don't know this word, there's no guarantee you know this word either. It's the same word, except this is just never written in real life. And it doesn't help a low-level learner who has never encountered either word before. If they have encountered the word before and they're studying for real-life Japanese usage, then they would have encountered the way it looks like in real life, which means it would be easier, actually, for them to see the kanji version because that's what they actually encounter. Not to mention, if the learner were to learn kanji separately, they may understand the meanings of the separate kanji here and they may be able to guess the meaning of this word. So this is why my verdict on the N4 is that it is useless and a waste of time. just like the N5. Let's open this up and look at an example. Question 16 over here. I'm going to read out the English translation so you can understand what this feels like for a native Japanese person. I heard that SATOU-san got HURT. Everybody was blank. 1. WORRIED. 2. DANGER. 3. RUDE. 4. BOW. Do you see how completely unrealistic this is because nobody writes like this? That's the problem with the N4 and the N5. Switching the kanji does not make it easier, it just makes it less realistic. And now, N2. After I cleared the mock N3, it took me about 5 or 6 months before I could clear the N2. But after the N2, it only really took me a few more months before I could clear the N1. So notice that the gap between the N2 and N1 is actually quite small. I would go as far to say that the N2 and N1 are basically the same. If anything, there is a significant jump between N3 difficulty and N2 difficulty just because the N2 and N1 have more words in general. Let's take a look at the example questions. Question 19. 通路に荷物を置いたら通る人の何々になりますよ。1. 面倒 2. 邪魔 3. 被害 4. 無理 Once again, the question asks for the most fitting answer, not the correct answer. And so if you think there are multiple correct answers here, it's on you to read in between the lines. But more importantly, now I'm not sure if the English translation did a good job at showing this, but this is rather closer to the N1 than it is to the N3. And so if the N2 and the N1 are so similar, then what is the difference between them? Well, for the N2, if you clear this and apply for a visa, I think you get something like 5 visa points. They have this system where the more points you have, the more likely you are to get a visa or something like that. This gives you 5 points, while the N1 gives you 10. They're basically the same test. This one gives you double the amount of points. So, is the N1 twice as hard as the N2? Like, does it contain double the amount of vocab and questions? No. Again, the difficulty level of words doesn't really exist. Like, think about it. What exactly makes atsuryoku an N1 word while denryoku an N2 word? The only difference between these two tests is that the N1 contains more words in general. So because there are more words, there's a higher chance that you encounter a word that you've never seen before. And this might mean that some key information might not be understood, and it also means you have to just generally read faster. So yeah, is it a little bit harder? Sure. Is it twice as hard? I don't think so. So my verdict on the N2 is that it's useless and a waste of time because you might as well just do the N1. So who is the JLPT actually for? Well, if you are just someone who is curious about your own level, I would not recommend doing any level of the JLPT and would instead just look for a mock pass paper online. Put yourself under the same time constraints and do the test as if it were the real test, and just see how you go. Now, if you need a visa, that's a separate thing. Remember that only the N2 and N1 actually give visa points, and because these two levels are so similar, just go for the N1 and get double the amount of points. Now you might say, well, but my Japanese is bad, I can't clear the N1. Well, then your chances of clearing the N2 aren't that high either. If you can clear the N2, chances are you can probably clear the N1. If you can't clear either of them, then N5 to N3 won't help you either because it doesn't give you points. So just improve. I don't know what else to tell you. Now, what if you're entering a school or going for a job that needs a certain level of proficiency? Then yes, you can go for whatever level they specify. However, put yourself in the shoes of the employer. You got a guy with an N4 and a guy with an N1. What looks better? Of course, that's not the full story. You have to actually have Japanese skills as well. But if you can already speak good Japanese, you can probably also study a bit harder and get the N1 and have an N1 and speak good Japanese, and your chances improve greatly. Okay, now we get into the topic of should you dedicate study time for the JLPT in particular. Now, obviously, studying for the test improves the odds of you getting a better score. Anyone who disagrees with that is an idiot. You have to understand that some of the questions here are incredibly unintuitive. Case in point, this particular type of question called the narabikae. This thing here trips up so many first-time test takers because they have no idea what the question is actually asking. If you have to spend time reading the instructions and looking at the example to figure out how to answer the question properly, you're just wasting time. If you had just studied for the test prior, you would know this test format already. There's no need to read all this and decipher all this, just get to answering the questions. So obviously, studying will increase the chances of you getting better scores. However, just because you can get better scores, does that mean you should study for it? Well, again, this depends on your goals. Take my own journey for an example. My initial motivation for learning Japanese in the first place was to understand this particular anime and understand some VTubers. I achieved that goal within like 6 months. So had I decided that that level was enough, then yeah, no, I would not need to study for a test in particular. I'm already happy with my current level. I don't need to go any higher. So why study? However, you'll know that I did study because I got some new motivation, which is to get some bragging rights on YouTube by clearing the JLPT as fast as I could, which I successfully did, I think. I have no problem with anyone who says I want to clear the JLPT as fast as possible just because it seems fun or just because I want to get bragging rights. That being said, number one, studying for this test in particular is not a necessary step to achieve actual real proficiency. If anything, it can actually be considered counterproductive. Because think about it, you might be spending your time learning some grammar point or word that you'll never actually encounter, just so you can be good. Whereas you could instead be practicing speaking with someone and actually developing proficiency. And also, just don't be shocked if you can clear the N1 and still not really be able to speak that well. You can see the first episode of each course for free on YouTube, but everything after that is Patreon exclusive. それではまた今度。